there are these kids who are throwing a temper tantrum and are so far away from any kind of beauty like that they lash out at it, that they want to destroy because they're incapable of creating. And when you're going to have so many people that did not learn through various traditions that have been passed on to them how some of them would be able to, let's say, become the leaders and be able to create, then we're going to have a lot of very angry people that are not going to have any job, that are going to be out to cause, they're going to fight in the Civil War. That's going to be the left side of the Civil War should that come to pass. So would you say that I am being overly dramatic here, or do you see something like this coming around? So Liberty Lockdown, what do you think?
I think you're exactly right, unfortunately. I think that when the great, just for everyone's knowledge, I'm like, economics is my thing. I'm a private money lender and investments is my thing. Ooh. So I understand the debt cycle probably better than not most of you, but most of the general population. And I think that is the real day of reckoning. Like, what we've experienced over the past 6 months has been a very watered down Marxist revolution. The real Marxist revolution, when, head chopping happens, is when the dollar itself loses its value, or you have just a terribly deflationary environment where the dollar becomes worth more, but no one's making any money. That's also a possibility, even though it's a much less of a chance of it. When that occurs, you'll see the real death and destruction. And whether or not it amounts to a civil war or it's just a straight Marxist revolution with people fighting for survival, I don't know. But I think that the clock is ticking. So
either way, you don't see the state helping increase the wealth of the citizens.
No.
Yeah. I see a pattern there.
Yeah. I don't have any examples of the state increasing the wealth of its citizens, so you'd have to give me that for me to believe that's a possibility.
Oh, I'd love to hear it, man. I'm all ears.
And Charlemagne, what do you think?
In terms of the state providing welfare and increasing the prosperity of the people, that doesn't really seem to be a common pattern in how states actually operate. Liberty Lockdown mentioned the debt cycle and other financial problems. Just this year, there's been sort of like a silent monetary revolution, I suppose, and the amount of the amount of money that actually exists has increased massively this year, and no one's really talking about it, right? And this is basically purely confiscatory, because what happens, it's basically just an invisible tax, right? So that's what the elites are doing. You get these little handouts like Trump bucks or whatever, and people think this is good, but even that's bad. If you look at this is anecdotal, I guess, but I've noticed that, luxury items have basically gone up at cost by about the exact amount that Trump gave everyone, right? So like all of this nonsense just hurts everyone at the end of the day. And, I think if you actually really want to increase the welfare of the citizenry, you just need to destroy the entire financial institution as it exists. The way money is handled in the United States is so unbelievably irresponsible. I don't even understand how the system is still going. I really expected a major crash this year, but somehow
student loans is a demon. Student loans.
People have unbelievable faith in the system because it is backed by the full faith and credit, and it's truly if you believe in the myth. And we
They're
all
also
do
pacified by medications and drugs.
It's that too, but it's also
pornography,
vis-a-vis the rest of the world. The United States is still on top.
Exactly.
So dollar demand is very high.
There is no competing currency that's backed by physical assets. So you have nothing but central banks all across the globe taking on the same practices and standards of the Federal Reserve. So while we have the strongest economy, barely, and we have the strongest currency, barely, because monetary velocity has been so low, you're not experiencing the inflation as the government prints trillions of dollars. When the economy comes back online, if it does, you should see significant inflation from those dollars as they begin to circulate more rapidly.
And another thing that's staving it off is
what, Jacob?
It is true that usury is a driving force of all of this. So the bankers do have to go, if you know what I mean. You have to get out.
Banks aren't even banks anymore.
There's the Marxist revolution chiming in.
This year, they changed the reserve rate to 0%. So banks aren't even obligated to hold any money at this point, right?
Well,
that's
they're not even lending anymore because they're just being such tight walls on people's credit because they're starting to lose faith in the system. And this is going to keep carrying on pretty much because like the dollar is the like world reserve currency. And then you have to keep in mind of like all international debt settles in dollars. And then just think of like how indebted our nation is as well. So I think debt plays a really big role in for the short time. The dollar is actually going to be deflationary and is going to be somewhat strong because there's going to be so much demand for it for I'm just going to say like the next 5 years or so. But then it's probably going to fucking go to shit after that. But who knows?
No, I think any. So we talked about this before about like Lindy or whatever. This has been around for almost 100 years at this point. What's going on? I mean, it seems to be coming to a crescendo, but the crescendo may have a long hill on the other side. I really like because I'm pretty hardcore ANCAP and. But I get into this a little bit sometimes with Sue and other libertarians too. Is I think that optimism and innovation is risky. I guess would be the best way to put it. Is
that's why I like him.
Yeah, you should always have a contrary opinion of everything and be prepared for what you think is going to work, not to work. So it could. But also, I mean, you think about things like, I do the same thing that you've been doing in this episode, Phil, and Liberty Lockdown a little bit, the same thing as you, where I blame everything on the state and the Federal Reserve, and it is to some degree part of that, and it's really easy to just be like, oh well, it's them or whatever. But it is partially them, but it's also a chicken and egg type of thing where a high time preference society yields inflationary currency, but also inflationary currency increases time preference. So it's cyclical and it reinforces each other. So
totally.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree.
Yeah.
So the thing is, Marxists, they love usury now. I mean, this is my controversial contention. This is a lot of reactionaries. They talk about how a lot of the ends of Marxism and hypercapitalism almost mimic each other in terms of the common goal, or rather subjectivity that they produce. I mean, why do you think Marxists nowadays are? Well, I mean, if you even look at the history of the Bolshevik Revolution being funded by Wall Street types. I mean, I know it's a controversial history, but
also
that's
the German government as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that. Well, this is the thing. Really, we have to really discredit the official history of the 20th century, the way that it's taught in the school system, because really, I would say that liberalism is just as equal, if not more, of a totalitarian ideology that won out over the two competing totalitarian ideologies.
I mean, based on my family history, I would disagree, just because you really have to live in that environment to really know what that's like, and that is not a good way of being at all. I mean,
Lev, this is all just Atlanticist propaganda.
Well, and also one thing that everybody was talking about earlier, which is kind of what I wanted to touch on, and you did get into it a little bit with the Hoppian discussion, is that if ANCAPs, and I think that ANCAPs need to be prepared for this, for being a very strong possibility, if ANCAPs are correct and we do win out, we are going to go back to a much, much more traditionalist society, because the liberalism, like you're talking about, what we enjoy, I guess, as social freedom in a lot of ways, is the result of high time preference. This is, or vice versa. This is when you have a hard money, it's going to encourage you to do things that we would consider religious or traditional, and also you're going to probably get these sort of Hoppian covenant communities. Some of them may be communist, but even look at a lot of like the covenant communities that are communist in a lot of ways, like the Amish and the Mennonites and the Anabaptists and some of the plain Quakers that do live in plain communities. They do have low scale communism where they do share things, and If one person's not doing well, the other one's share it. You do get some degree of wealth separation, but you got that in the Soviet Union too. So, and those societies, again, those societies are not wealthy. They're wealthy in a different way. They're wealthy in what they value. But if you're in a society where money is hard, you're probably going to encourage things that make you think of the future so that you can leave your children things and so that you can have children and so that your legacy continues. If you have no hope of your legacy continuing in this world, what's the point? Why wouldn't you just spend it all? You don't need to save it.
Well, that's like that whole cycle of
Well
history,
said.
right? Like hard times make strong men make good
Right.
times make weak men make hard times. I mean, it's such a cliche now, but it seems like we're seeing it, like maybe we're not seeing it in direct cycles, but we're definitely seeing aspects of it today. And I don't know, like it seems to me that so many of us, other than maybe certain fine points, we are all agreeing about a lot of these different things. And I wonder what that says, like, because I'm sure all of us, we don't see solutions being necessarily the same. We do see the problems being the same. And I wonder if it is possible to get people who are more in the, woke capital side, like maybe not extreme leftists, but people who happen to, like I always say, read the New Yorker, read the New York Times, listen to NPR.
Like a real neoliberal, like
Exactly.
a Destiny type.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like if we were to get, but see,
Professionals.
Destiny is professional. Like he's a professional ranter. I'm talking about getting
Oh my
people
God.
who are not professional ranters, but people who happen to exist within this cathedral society, and just sit down with them and talk with them like we're talking about right now. Like what would be certain things, like God, I wish we had one right now, but what would be certain things that they would be able to, let's say, have an argument against or push back on to all the things that we're discussing right now? Like, I don't know who'd want to put on the mask of being that kind of person. And
Capitalism's evil.
Well, I think, and whether they consciously would argue from this perspective or not is, I think somebody who is pro the current system doesn't want to rock the boat because they're comfortable. And
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
yeah, I think that's, and I'm guilty of this too. Like, I mean, like I live in the suburbs. I've got a nice
We
house.
all are,
Way-
man.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't want things to fail. Like I'm terrified of the collapse of the United States, but I want to be prepared for it. So, and I don't really see, and I'm not terrified just for the United States. I'm terrified for the world, for the collapse of the United States. I think overall, despite the wars and the destruction and stuff like that, overall, the United States has been a very stabilizing force. I mean, the world didn't collapse after two major world wars. And I think that's largely because of the United States. Now, World War I, we could have a lot of arguments about the United States role in that, but it has been a stabilizing force since the United States has been on top as a world power. World poverty has gone down tremendously. A lot of this, though, is the degree of economic freedom and that the United States has kind of bestowed on the rest of the world. And also, I think it has a lot to do with, and I know that like a lot of the more left libertarians and stuff like to poo-poo this, but I do think that, and as much as I don't like them, I do think it has a lot to do with a lot of the ethic that the ethics that Puritans kind of gave us, which is you work for the sake of work, and that it's godly to do so. Americans are,
Yeah, but that led to modern ultra Calvinism, which is the precursor to woke.
Well, it did,
right?
but it also made people
A secular version, a profaned version of it.
It
yeah.
did, but it also made production in the world so ridiculously high for so long because people just didn't sit around doing nothing. You know, people always
wait, but
Thaddeus
were
Russell,
people doing nothing though? Like the people who are working on the land, I'm sure all their minds were occupied by all these, like the wind is going this way, these crops have to be watered now. You know, like all this stuff.
Well,
Like,
but I
don't
mean,
know.
if you look at like a good example of this, and I very much disagree with him on a lot of things, but like Thaddeus Russell talks a lot about this, but like the caricature of the drunk Irishman who they work at enough to get food and that's it, and then they spend the rest of their time fucking, drinking, and dancing and whatever, and that caricature though has a lot of truth to it. Like and this is. From Thaddeus's standpoint, from Thaddeus's standpoint, he would be like, "This is the ideal. This is why he worships Black culture, because it does come out of that type of Celtic culture." At least
Dude, I
according
thought
to,
you were gonna go into how free the slaves were. Like that just kind of blew my mind.
Yeah,
and,
he,
and the
and
brothels.
he does that, and like, I think that is antithetical to a solid society. But you do get this from a lot of left libertarians, where they're like, "Oh, we've got to celebrate the prostitutes, we've got to celebrate, the heroin addicts." And all
Oh
that
God!
Well, we are going to have
apparently
Alexander
under
Bard.
communism, we're going to
coming
have
in.
redistribution of sexual economy.
Yeah, well,
according to that Merrick bread tuber.
Oh, that.
But that's why.
should
But
get her
that's
on.
why I think that's why though.
Oh, we'll get her on. Don't worry. We will get her on. Don't worry.
I think that's why you
Yeah.
in like the NCAP movement though, you get a large number of, well, a Quaker like me, but like a lot of Catholics, a lot of Calvinists, or different types of more hardline Protestantism, and I think it's because they realize that when the state and again, like be wary about blaming the state for everything, because it is I think to some degree a reflection of us, but as a society as a whole. But I think they realize that when that comfort is gone, chaos is only subdued by a hardline moral society in a lot of ways. And
Entirely agree.
yeah,
Exactly.
and I think that's why most I wouldn't say most libertarians, but a lot of libertarians in kind of my camp would say that libertarianism is a philosophy of law, and economics from our, like, Austrian economics is descriptive, not prescriptive. It's just telling you this is what's going on. It's not saying it's good or bad necessarily. And then we have our other things that tell us if it's good or bad.